Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Berkuta,
And I'm Angelo Longo.
and welcome to Goliath Cyber Security's Cyber Insanity.
Insanity.
We are going to try to help ourselves here, and I know Gabriella is under the weather, but shout out to her when she hears this podcast. Hope she feels better. She's our producer and official cat herder to make sure that everything runs right in the background. So Gabriella is taking no ownership of how we do this podcast, which means, Angelo,
We're
it's
gonna do
just
this all by.
us.
We can do it
It's
by
just
song.
us. We
Grab
could
your guitar and let's do this all by song.
no. Rest assured, everyone, we will not torture with singing or playing of said instrument. But I did have something that just kind of popped up, and it reminded me of something when I was growing up. So growing up, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening that have this, and I'm sure you've had something that you've used successfully, maybe not successfully, but growing up, we were told when the street lights go on, you have to come into the house.
Seems reasonable. Kind of.
And when you're in the middle of um, really good snow and you're sledding or hitting the slopes or something, you just want that extra run. Or I played street hockey. We were in the middle of a game and it was really going well and had no desire to come in at the appointed time. Of course, the wrath of mom comes into play. You come home. Why weren't you in? Why didn't you come in when the street lights went on? You're late. Late for dinner. You're late for your own funeral.
Yep.
What's happening? So, um, the excuses abound, right? It's sudden death in hockey. I can't leave my team. It's dire. Um, I didn't know. I didn't see the streetlights because wherever the hill was, the snow did. It was just light with all the snow, and I couldn't really tell when the streetlights went on. Or hey, you didn't get me a watch. It's your fault, right? Any of those excuses that you've used, or any good ones that you can think of?
I would think that I got lost on my way home from my friend's house that was next door. I tried. That didn't work.
Oh,
You know,
and that
when you start looking at those excuses, you're scrambling for words at the last second.
and I guess this is where I think today's podcast leads us, right? Um, but I didn't know. I didn't know, or there's certain excuses that I have heard from years of experience and things that I've heard or seen in my lifetime that have been um, have been used by executives, by CISOs, by CEOs, by board members. And it got me thinking with compliance and everything, do these still work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question.
So I made my list for you.
Hey, let me ask you a question. If you're in Canada and it says 88 kilometers an hour, what speed do you think you can go? To
80
me,
miles an hour.
yeah,
No.
exactly. Yeah, that whole thing about ignorance.
Well, and that brings up an interesting analogy because maybe in years past when we had the analog speedometers and they only had those big numbers in miles per hour, today's day and age, the automobiles are pretty smart. You push a button, it converts it from miles to kilometers or kilometers to miles.
Yep, you can probably talk to it, be able to do it.
And I would say the officer would not be that lenient, to probably even more um, rigid in their judgment to you with a ticket.
And justifiably so. Your
And
ignorance
justify.
does not you know get you off.
So with all of these types of um, you know overwhelming things that are happening this day, right? You have weak and stolen credentials. They compromise your passwords and common cause of data breaches today. Or and you hear people that say, oh, but it's hard for me to remember, right? I'll never remember the big long hunkin', that's an official technical term, a hunkin'
Official.
size password. It's official, right? Or let's look at application vulnerabilities. At some point, somebody has to patch something, but I didn't have
Well,
time, right?
yeah.
I didn't have time. And then you look at things like malicious insiders, right? Those people, they're intentional in their thing, and that really doesn't come to an excuse. It's the ones that are not malicious that I find come up with an excuse. I didn't read the policy. I didn't read something.
So something like where and they weren't educated on it. They didn't have they didn't know where the policies were. Those are all things to take into account.
But it doesn't hold water anymore. It really doesn't, because policies you have to sign off for now, or you should. I think is where you should have your employees when they just start their employment with you. And this is some of those things that you've put in place with clients is a formal sign up document that says I have read and I will abide by the policies. It's kind of a terms of employment,
Right.
and that's not really for. Uh, yes, it's for them to read the policies, you hope,
Mm-hmm.
but from an executive perspective, from a director of security's perspective, this is kind of your, I don't want to say get out of jail, but it kind of is to say, look, we've done our due diligence to try to train our people. Does that hold water? Does that
So,
help?
well, you start
Is the
really getting
helping
into it.
cause?
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, it does. There's a legality aspect to it. In the end, you've had the B word account happen to you. You've been breached. You had
right.
data exfiltrated, pulled out of the organization, put someplace. You've had things occur, but the reality of it is, it's up to you to constrain the organization in whatever way you can, given the parameters of your position. Raise risks, get
Mhm.
people to understand where and what is failing in the organization, and really go forth from there. That falls on the people who run security for that company, the people who run the aspects of keeping that corporation secure. But there's a legal aspect of, you were told not to do it.
Mhm.
You were told it wasn't allowed, how you should do it, where you should, and that helps you in when you go back and say, hey, here is this person who was informed, signed off, and left it from there, and we're able to say, okay, they did it. Now let's face it, how many people watched your corporate learning management system and say, yep, I watched the entire video and then I answered the quiz? How many people just go right to the end and try to answer the quiz and just see, the three thing quiz and just they get to sign them? There's a lot of people like that, and I'll
Yeah.
state I may have been guilty, not on the security side, but on other genres that I may have fast forwarded some videos, and it's learning management is really about presenting something that the employee has been trained in some way or fashion that they can take with them. But the reality of it is, the employee must ingest some sort of knowledge to come to the ability to understand that they are responsible in some way for the maintenance of what they have control over. And this is where we're at.
Yep.
Their ignorance, it comes back to them not really understanding how they're not really understanding that the fact that they are responsible, and there's dual fault, their own fault for not taking seriously the training, and then the fault of the organization for not impressing upon them over and over again how important this is, and then finally their actions in the end which failed it. So, and we're painting a scenario. This is a straw man. We're building them up,
Sure.
we're not going down. So
Yeah.
reality is, let's not go far for that. But your ignorance, you're ignorant because you didn't learn. You didn't learn because you didn't try. You didn't try because you didn't have time. That's where
Right.
the excuses are going to come into play. But what happens when, you just mentioned, somebody does it unintentionally. Somebody does
Right.
it from the point of view of, hey, I didn't, my kid unbuckled their seatbelt in the back seat. I didn't
Mhm.
know. We got buzzers now up on the dash. My car has this ringing noise. It does it for like 20 minutes. So I've tested it. So the reality is it's annoying. It's really hard to
Yep.
miss it unless they go in under the seat to the seatbelt or under their butt. I think we need to get more serious about getting people to understand how serious their commitment is.
Yeah, good point. And I think one of my biggest pet peeves is um, training. Right. Teaching our heads what to do. We got to feed it. Right. We have to train it. We have to exercise it. Um, it's almost the first thing that gets cut off of a budget is training. And yet that is the most crucial thing because, our first excuse that I had in my list was I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you would know if you were trained. You would know if you know, reinforced it. There wouldn't be an excuse of I didn't know. And as a result, I don't know or I didn't know doesn't really cut it with auditors. I
No,
mean, I mean, no, not at all. And that's one of those things that I think we often figure, oh, it's good enough, it'll work. It doesn't, right? And so here's a here's another one. And I love this one. Well, this is the Olympic swim lane, right? It wasn't my job or responsibility.
oh
Ooh.
man,
Um, I'm gonna say security is everybody's responsibility in your organization, from the
preach
person
it.
on the the person on the dock, the plant, the executives, the administrative staff, whatever. Um, the security guard, right?
Oh yeah,
That's their responsibility. There's no reason to have a password taped on the bottom of your keyboard or an easy to guess password. Um, well, it's not my responsibility to call up our security hotline to say, hey, look, somebody left a password taped on the bottom of the keyboard. You're not being a bad steward of your environment. You're trying to reinforce a security mindset and culture. And the only way to change that is to be a part of it, an effective change and catalyst for a secured environment.
and you're dead on. We have password managers out there ad nauseum.
Yeah,
It will not only save your password, but generate a password in many
right,
different flavors and complexities. We have MFA, which takes its function of something you have, something something you are.
right,
When you start looking at those things, how many people have a a phone with
right.
Microsoft
Yep,
Authenticator on it? Microsoft
absolutely.
Authenticator not only sends a push notification, then asks you what the number is, and then follows up from that, makes you do a face recognition or a code to determine if it's really you. There's
Yeah,
multiple different portions of authentication occurring there. That's much
yeah,
better than just not. It's much better than nothing, obviously, but it's also much better than say the SMS, where somebody says it's to somebody's phone number and you give a
mhm.
code. But these are steps in the right direction. The
And
reality
shout out
is
and shout
that's
out
that we need to get there.
yeah, shout out
Yeah.
to Microsoft and Google if you don't like the Microsoft flavor and authenticator, right? They are both putting out those authenticators for free.
Yep.
There is zero charge for those. So to say that I can't afford it or I don't understand it, they have both made tremendous efforts to make it accessible uh, for um, for just a casual user all the way up to a corporate user, and they've left it at no charge because it's the right thing to do. So my hats off to those two
Yep.
organizations alone. There are others as well, but to say that it wasn't, that I don't need that type of tool or that type of protection is really a false sense of security,
Absolutely. How many people
right?
have been breached by their personal password that they used on their personal email that got compromised? And now
Right,
suddenly we do a lookup in LinkedIn and we find out you work here. And then we use
right,
your personal password that's been breached with your
right,
corporate email that you would never associate it with, because your corporate email can be derived because
right.
of other relationships that people have had with that company. There's data sets out there. So now suddenly they may have your personal password or an iteration therein. Lots of
Hmm.
people iterate, and it doesn't take it just takes one to have exposed, and that exposure leads to you know those bad
Right.
things.
Right, and that which leads really a segue to some other questions that, or some other answers that I've heard is we didn't have the budget to fund the initiative. It's offered for free, like MFA, um,
Mm-hmm.
or we didn't have time to review it and update it, which that's not an excuse, or we don't have enough skilled people to do it, or nobody told us. Right? Pick that swath of excuses. It takes it off the table when these things are accessible and they're at no
Mm-hmm.
cost, right? Um, it's still our responsibility to look into those things, new technologies, better ways of doing things. And I'm guilty of this too, right? I mean, I'm gonna, it's easy to cast the stone elsewhere, but let me lay this at my feet. Is, how easy it is to get into a lull where you start reusing a password or two.
Oh,
You
gotcha.
start, right, you start saying, well, it's not an important website, or it's not an important app. I'm just going to give it a very easy password so I can remember it and I don't have to worry about it. Oh, here's the password app. It says, do you want to save it? Yeah. The problem with that, I see, is even though it's an easy password and it's a non-important type of website, for example, they still
Right.
collect private information. Information, for example, like, and people go, "Wow, that's nothing." Where'd you go to school? Where was your Who's your third grade teacher? Or where? What was your first car? Or what was, your
Your
mother's
first
maiden
pet.
name? Or where was your dad's first home? Or what? It's like, if I stitch those answers together, and I'm surprised that our security community hasn't gravitated to this. But if we stitch all these questions, these minimalistic questions together for resetting a password, I could get a pretty decent profile on you, Angelo.
Absolutely.
I can I
Absolutely.
can find out where you went to school because I can trace back what elementary school it was. I bet you grew up there, so whatever that school district is. I bet you if you had the first car, I could probably track it down to, um, you know, some interesting information that maybe is archived in a DMV or an insurance carrier somewhere. If I
By the
if I
way, mine
find
was definitely a convertible Maserati. So that's obviously
Oh,
what I got.
okay, well, it's modest. It's not a Ferrari. It's not too flashy, but that's nice. I mean, it it really comes back to doing our due diligence to make sure that we are not leaving ourselves susceptible and open, because then nobody told us, or I don't know can't play, right? We're This podcast, we're telling you now. Okay, if you
Hello.
haven't known,
Knock,
the
knock.
ostrich must come out of the sand, right? The neck has to come out of the sand, right? Um, I've seen this too many times, and as some of my final excuses is, we thought our vendor or supplier or provider was to take care of this, or hey, we're not a tech company or in the business that need this,
So this
or
is
we have.
this is, goes back to what we were just saying. We just lauded Microsoft for something, but there is the counter argument. they have a good product. They have
Mhm.
that delivers decent authentication
Mhm.
mechanism. I'm not saying it's the best. I'm not saying it's un, unbreakable. I'm not saying anything like that. But I'm saying it's a heck of a lot better than doing nothing, and it's a lot better than just doing some of the little things. You can get to a good state. What I really wish they would do is push the profiles of these people grabbing Microsoft Office 365 um, products and make them get more secure over time. They're slow rolling it, and they're slow rolling it because they know the populace is uneducated.
Right.
And I can't say they have the same issue that a corporate CISO or director of security or whomever would have with dealing with an entry level person who maybe just graduated from college or maybe didn't graduate from college and they don't understand the ramifications of what they do and and so they have to educate those people to get them to that point. But right there, you said it. The defaults, the basic settings. People just think that, and by the way, I'm extrapolating from the we think that they're protecting us just because you have
Mhm.
a some type of EDR product on your machine, just because you have some type of you know cloud-based infrastructure does not mean that the protections are enabled, that
Mhm.
there are settings that to keep it private. There's been many people who have what are called open S3 buckets sitting on Amazon, AWS,
Mhm.
Amazon Web. There are search engines for S3 buckets. S3 buckets, for everybody, is basically a folder that sits in the cloud that other websites reference. Hey, give me this graphic. Do this. Typically, that relationship is private and behind the scenes. But in a lot of cases, those S3 buckets, those folders, those cloud folders, are just sitting out there, ready to be searched and looked at with whatever has been put into them. And
Right.
that could be your data, it could be my data, it could be your corporate data. You don't know because it's now sitting in a bucket. Scary.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think let's look at, and I'm certainly not picking on vendors or whatever, but I have seen, as I'm sure you have, where vendors have some type of default password or some
oh,
type of default login credential
yep.
that they like to use. And, you know, 7 years, let's pick on a telephony system, right? They're not swapped out normally on a yearly 2 year cycle. All
Yep.
right. You keep those in, if as long as the telephone's working, we're fine in the office, right?
Yep.
That thing will rust and corrode, and but as long as the voicemail's picked up and I can make a call, nobody changes it out. But how about your password in there? How many times have you gone behind a vendor to change out the admin password or credentials or the roles and login requirements um, after they do some work,
Yeah.
or have that turned off entirely?
I, I've seen it more times than I care to count, and the problem is there's no ability to measure exposure
Right.
post tense because you
Yeah.
would have to go in and basically do a internet wide survey to see what was there
Hmm.
and where it sits. And so and I'm being worst case scenario. Let me just put it
Sure.
this way. Yeah,
Sure.
but the very fact you have a basic default password, that's one of the first things people check if I'm trying to infiltrate your organization. I go in, I do a search just to make a determination what's showing on the internet or showing visibly externally, and then post tense I go in and do a search of all the default passwords. Now this is legal pen test
Hmm.
work to that you've been authorized to do, mind you, legal assessment
Right.
work that you've been authorized to do. This is anytime you enter a username and password into a system you do not know, PSA by the way, is hacking. That is that, and if you're not legally authorized to do so, you are doing that illegally. If
Right.
it's not legal, it's illegal. There
Right.
isn't a
There's
gray
no gray area.
area.
Exactly. Okay. here's so as we're coming to a close, I have my final one, and I have experienced this one personally. Well, I've been told this by an executive, and I'm going to somewhat quote this. Who would want to do this to us, right? We make dreams come true. Or another way of saying this, employees wouldn't do this, or we trust our people.
Right. So this is I've seen this in many different flavors, and you're just one example of that flavor. Another example is the technology being too new, like MFA is too new. But the reality is, it was you get a good chuckle out of that.
I
Um,
did.
the reality is people don't think they're targets, but they don't realize that the international crime syndicate or nation state attacker does not really care whom you are. You may be targeted because you're in an industry. You may be targeted because you're showing up on Shodan as being publicly searchable.
Right.
From a point of view of exposure, they don't care who you are. They're going to try. They're going to try to attack. They're going to try to gain access. They're going to try to do certain set of things. Their thing is they want to get a few dollars from you. They want to get a few dollars from everybody. And in that, they're trying to attack and gain money and go from there. That few dollars could be $100,000 or it could be $5. They don't care. It's what you have exposed and what they can get access to and what they can do with that access. Ransomware is a different attack than what we're talking about here. Ransomware is you most likely clicking on something and bringing it into your organization. That's different from what we're talking about here. But the reality is the same. People will attack it with whatever methodology they want to use. And and just to be clear, ransomware could be a orchestrated attack, but 9 times out of 10, they're attacks of opportunity.
Right.
And they don't care if make artificial hearts to candied eggs. Just make something out of it.
Sure.
I guess they do. Somebody makes candy eggs.
I guess as they say, if you're going to be walking down a seedy alley, don't put dollar bills hanging out of your pocket. Right. I mean, you don't want to be and present yourself as a target of this type of attack. So do your due diligence, which really comes up to our wrap up and conclusion for today, I think, which is some truths out of this conversation. One, there's no excuse today.
None.
It doesn't fly. And I think the second part of that is there's enough regulatory bite today and requirements that don't allow you that leeway for the excuse. That's that policeman that says, well, you could have pushed the button and gone into kilometers or in miles per hour and be in my jurisdiction. And you've seen a lot of this compliance piece that has gotten over the years tighter and tighter where there's no leeway.
Yeah, this is getting to a point where the regulators are getting much more critical, much more focused on you delivering what you need to deliver. They don't care if you're big, you're small. They want it delivered in the same way. Regulators, no matter what. Take, for instance, payment card industry. They don't really care if you're taking 200 transactions or 2 million transactions.
Right.
They don't care if you're taking $20 or $200 million. That they care about is it's done right and done consistently. And the payment card industry has backed their own standard. The same thing can be said, about a lot of them. But the reality is the information's out there for anybody to read. You go on the internet, go to Google, go to Bing if you're so inclined, and then basically type in payment card security steps, whatever it is. You can find out. You can find out top speed in Canada. You can find that out.
Right.
Kilometers to miles an hour transaction. You can find it on your phone, probably by talking to it. You can find it on a computer. It's this day and age, the information's there. The ignorance is brought up, I think, and this is my personal standpoint. Ignorance
Mhm.
is brought up by the fact that the information is so available, people think they can reference it in any given moment of need. The problem is that there's no preparation for the event in question. That they, when they turn around, they can't do anything. So
Right.
it is actually kind of a, sad state of affairs in question here. So anyway,
Indeed. No, and I think ultimately it becomes a ticking time bomb for your organization with respect to risk, right? I mean, you don't go down the path of this. This is the ignorance card is no longer available.
no,
There is no get out of jail free card. It's been minimized and it's being removed from every iteration of regulation.
agreed.
um, it's an iterative process to get security in place and educated and used appropriately. I think it has to be accessible, right?
Mhm.
What's your favorite saying about complexity, right?
Complexity is the enemy of security.
Right.
If you can't understand it, you're probably not secure.
Right. How do I apply it if I don't understand what I'm doing? Right. It
Exactly.
makes no sense to me, but that's such a common
Mhm.
sense saying,
What
but it's
note?
so
Copyright
valid.
note. Well, not
Oh,
copyright, but that's not my. I didn't make that up. I'm not that smart. There's
yeah.
other smart people out there who made that up,
I think you're
and
smart.
well, I'm just. I listened to them and I'm repeating what they said. So
Okay. Well, I'll say that you're a champion for that phrase then. How's that?
I like that.
We'll skirt any copyright thing. But I guess as a parting message for our podcasters is our listeners and viewers is this, right? If you don't know how to start, if you don't know where it is, or if you lost the forest from the trees as far as your security, both Angelo and I are with Goliath Cyber Security for a reason, right? The Goliath Executive Services. This is where Angelo and his team are experts in. They can help you immediately. Talk to us. It's free call, free help to be able to get you understanding where you are, and through engaging with the services, being able to draw on this expertise, it doesn't become complex. It becomes usable and accessible and far reaching in your organization so that everybody can apply security appropriately. And at the end of the day, that's what auditors want to see. And that's what's going to make hackers run away because they can't find a way in.
And that's what you. And basically, you're deflecting the bad people. You're deflecting the bad things. You're deflecting.
Yep.
You need to do the due diligence. You need to stand. Somebody needs to stand guard and say, "Hey,
Right.
there's no entrance this way."
So hopefully we've brought and imparted some wisdom to our listeners. I think we had, and I think we didn't make things blow up. So Gabriella, you are missed. We know. We are doing our earnest and hope that you come back to us. Um, but as our last parting thought, remember this: that the best security device resides between our ears. Have a great day. Stay safe. Until next time.
See ya.